Under a flickering streetlight on a quiet street in Braddock, Pennsylvania, three teenage boys skulked in the autumn chill. The leader, Tyler, pulled a crowbar from his backpack with a cocky grin. Malik, slender and jittery, cast quick glances up and down the empty road as he held up his phone to scan for any alarm signals. Jason, the third boy, hung back a step, tugging nervously at his sleeves. Across the street, hidden in the shadow of a porch, a gray-haired man named Walter Grant watched them intently. He quietly counted their footfalls as they approached. "Piece of cake," Tyler murmured, eyes on the modest bungalow ahead. "Old guy's probably asleep." His tone dripped with confidence. Malik smirked and nodded, finding no sign of alarms on his phone. Jason shifted anxiously, forcing himself to follow. Behind his curtain, Walt's sharp eyes tracked the trio. They had pegged him as an easy target. They couldn't have been more wrong. Beneath Walt's stooped posture and limp was a lifetime of hard-earned instincts. Decades in the FBI had taught him to read people, and he could see the jittery excitement in the boys' movements. They had picked the wrong house. A dry wind rattled dead leaves along the curb as Tyler unlatched Walt's front gate. In their dark hoodies, the boys blended into the night. None of them noticed the tiny infrared sensor on the porch rail that silently alerted Walt to their presence. Walt's heart thumped steadily, not with fear, but with focus. He slipped away from the window and moved deeper into the unlit living room. In his hand, a custom pager vibrated twice. The front yard motion detector had been tripped. Outside, Tyler gestured for Malik and Jason to follow him up the porch steps. Jason's courage was failing. He lagged a moment until Malik nudged him. Tyler wedged the crowbar into the front door jamb and gave a careful pry. Creak! The old lock gave way with a soft snap. Walt, hidden inside, heard the faint pop and felt a surge of adrenaline. It was time. As the door inched open, Walt melted into a dark corner, steadying his breathing. The teenagers slipped inside, silhouettes against the faint streetlight glow. They thought the house and its owner were helpless. They couldn't have been more wrong. Walt's pager vibrated again. Entry sensor tripped. He allowed himself one ghost of a smile in the darkness. Showtime. If you think these cocky teens are about to get what they deserve, then subscribe now to see justice unfold. Earlier that evening, Walt Grant sat on his porch in Braddock, Pennsylvania, as dusk settled over the tired steel town. The street was lined with aging brick row houses, and the hulking silhouette of an old steel mill loomed against the purple sky. A lone LED streetlight flickered overhead. The city hadn't gotten around to fixing its glitchy timer. Walt absent-mindedly tapped a slow rhythm on the wooden railing, an old habit from countless stakeouts in his FBI days. After 35 years in counterintelligence, he had hoped for a quiet retirement here. But tonight, his steel-gray eyes were alert, scanning the street for any sign of trouble. All week, Walt had noticed 3 local teenagers hanging around the block, watching houses, especially his. Maybe it was the way he walked with a slight limp or his grandfatherly demeanor, but the kids had pegged him as an easy mark. Walt's late wife Maggie used to tease that he could never let his guard down, and she was right. Sensing the brewing mischief, Walt spent the afternoon readying a few tricks of his own. He had outfitted his modest bungalow with some unconventional security. An antique radio on the side table was secretly wired to motion sensors in the yard. A decorative birdhouse hid a tiny camera, and even the wind chimes by the front door were rigged to trip a silent alarm. All of it fed to the small pager in Walt's jacket pocket. If anyone tried to break in, he would know instantly, and they would never hear a thing. By 11 p.m., a hush had fallen over the neighborhood. Walt turned off his living room lamp and sat in darkness, patiently waiting in an armchair that faced the door. Outside, the autumn night was silent, save for the rustle of leaves. As minutes ticked by, Walt's thoughts drifted briefly to how much he missed Maggie and how she would scold him for what he was prepared to do. He gave a faint smile at the thought. Then, just before midnight, movement. 3 silhouettes emerged under the streetlight at the end of the block. Walt's jaw tightened slightly. It was the trio, Tyler, Malik, and Jason, creeping toward his house. So they had chosen tonight after all. Walt quietly rose from his chair. He flipped a switch by the door, killing the faint porch light, and slipped into the deepest shadow of the living room. His heart rate picked up, but his mind was cool and focused. Decades of training clicked into place. A barely there crunch of gravel came from the front walk. Through a gap in the curtains, Walt saw the boys approaching his porch. Tyler was in front, holding something that looked like a crowbar. Malik and Jason followed close behind. Walt drew a slow breath and steadied himself. He reached into his pocket and clicked the pager to active mode. A second later, the pager vibrated against his palm. One of his sensors had been tripped. Someone was at the porch. Walt's lips pressed into a thin line, right on schedule. Suddenly, a muted crack echoed from the front door as the lock gave way. They were coming in. Walt eased behind a tall bookshelf, shrouded in darkness. The front door creaked open. 3 figures slipped inside Walt's home, as silent as they could be. In the gloom, Tyler's outline was visible at the head of the pack. Walt could just make out the glint of the crowbar in his hand. None of the intruders noticed the old man standing just a few feet away, hidden in the blind spot between the hallway and parlor. Walt's pulse was steady. The boys thought they were the hunters tonight, but they were about to learn they were the prey. The trap was set, and Walt was about to spring it. Have you ever underestimated someone and been completely surprised by what they could do? Share your story in the comments. Jason's eyes darted around the pitch-black living room. His pulse roared in his ears. In the darkness behind him, Walt moved like a shadow. The old agent had spent years training to be silent and unseen. He knew every creak in the floor. As Tyler and Malik crept down the hall toward the bedroom, Jason lingered near the door, torn between fear and loyalty. A faint beam from Malik's phone revealed dusty picture frames on the wall. One showed Walt in a dark suit shaking hands with officials. Something about it suggested law enforcement. Jason's stomach clenched. Who is this man? He wondered. Down the hallway, Tyler approached the slightly open bedroom door, crowbar poised. Malik followed close, phone light in one hand. In the shadows, they saw what looked like a figure under the bed's blanket. Tyler flashed a grin back at Malik. Out like a light, he mouthed, assuming the old man was fast asleep. They slipped into the bedroom like wraiths. In one swift move, Tyler yanked the blanket back to subdue the sleeper, only to find nothing but pillows and an old baseball bat arranged under the sheets. It was a dummy. "What the?" Tyler blurted, realizing they'd been duped. Before he could react, the bedroom door slammed shut behind them. Walt had been waiting. He jammed a metal bar through the door handles, trapping the pair inside. Tyler lunged at the door, rattling the knob violently. "Hey!" he hissed in panic, throwing his shoulder against the solid wood. It didn't budge. Malik's heart thundered. He pressed an ear to the door. Outside the house was eerily quiet. In the living room, the slam made Jason jump. He spun toward the hallway. "Tyler, Malik," he called softly, voice quivering. In that instant, a strong hand clamped over Jason's mouth and an arm locked around his torso. Jason froze, eyes wide. A calm voice whispered from the darkness, "Easy, kid. Don't struggle." Jason felt a zip tie tighten around his wrists before he could even think to fight back. In seconds, Walt had him subdued. "Down," Walt murmured, gently easing the trembling Jason to the floor behind the couch. "Stay quiet." Jason nodded frantically, tears pricking his eyes. In the bedroom, Tyler and Malik were desperate. Tyler wedged his crowbar into the doorframe, teeth gritted as he tried to pry the door open. Malik fumbled a pocket knife from his pocket and stabbed it at the latch uselessly. This was not the easy score they'd imagined. "Let us out, old man!" Tyler finally shouted, voice cracking with fear and fury. From just outside the door, Walt's voice came, low and authoritative. "That's enough, Tyler." Both teens inside fell silent, stunned that Walt knew their names. Walt continued, slow and firm. "Slide the crowbar and that knife out under the door. Now." Malik tugged Tyler's sleeve, whispering, "Do it." Tyler's chest heaved with rage. When he didn't comply, Walt pressed a button on a small remote in his hand, and an ear-splitting siren suddenly screamed from a device hidden under the bed. A high-pitched alarm filled the room, so loud it felt like the walls were shaking. Tyler and Malik cringed, covering their ears in agony. "Okay, okay," Malik yelled. Tyler dropped the crowbar with a clang. After a few seconds, Walt silenced the siren. A heavy silence followed. Then, with a loud scrape, the crowbar slid out under the door, followed by the knife. Walt swiftly kicked both tools far down the hallway. In one smooth motion, he pulled the metal bar from the door and flung the door open. Walt's tall figure filled the doorway, a flashlight in hand cutting through the dark. Tyler and Malik squinted against the beam of light. "On the floor, face down," Walt barked, voice sharpened by decades of authority. Disoriented and terrified, the two boys obeyed. They lay down on the floor, surrendering at last. Within moments, Walt secured zip ties around both teenagers' wrists. Any fight left in them was gone. "Up!" he ordered briskly. He marched the subdued pair out into the hallway, each pinned by a firm grip on their arm. Malik's eyes were wet with tears of fright. Tyler hung his head, breathing hard. In the living room, Walt flicked on a lamp, casting a low glow over the scene. Jason sat on the floor by the sofa, bound but unharmed, his face streaked with tears. Walt guided Tyler and Malik to sit beside him. Now, all three would-be intruders sat together on the rug, wrists tied behind their backs. They panted for breath, exchanged frightened glances, and avoided looking directly at Walt. The quiet that fell was deafening. Walt stood over the teenagers, his shadow stretching across the floor. Tyler finally broke the silence, his voice very small. "What are you going to do to us?" he stammered. He tried to sound defiant, but it came out as a plea. Malik closed his eyes in despair, and Jason could only sniffle. Walt's face was unreadable. "I'm going to call the police," he said calmly, "and you're going to face the consequences." The teens closed their eyes, a collective dread washing over them. Walt glanced at the scattered evidence of their break-in, the crowbar, the dropped backpack by the door, and then back at the three scared kids in front of him. His hard gaze softened just a little. "But first," he added quietly, "we're going to have a talk about what just happened here." With that, Walt stooped and picked up the backpack one of them had dropped. From it he pulled out a few items: a cheap bottle of whiskey, a roll of duct tape, some zip ties they'd intended to use. He placed them on the coffee table methodically. The teenagers watched silently, shamed by how foolish their plan looked now. Walt took a step toward the kitchen, then paused. "Don't move and don't even think about yelling," he warned. His voice was low but clear. "We're far enough from neighbors, and I've soundproofed this house well. No one will hear you." Tyler, Malik, and Jason sat rigidly, hardly daring to breathe. Satisfied they wouldn't try anything, Walt disappeared around the corner into the kitchen, leaving the three to stew in their fear. A minute later, the boys heard the clink of a pot on the stove and the whoosh of a burner lighting. They looked at each other in confusion. Was he cooking something? Tyler tugged at his bindings in vain. Malik wiped sweat from his brow on his shoulder, and Jason silently prayed this night would somehow end without ruining their lives. None of them had any idea what Walt Grant, the gray-haired man who had just bested them, was planning next. If Walt's quiet brand of justice has you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to subscribe for more stories of unexpected heroes. Walt returned from the kitchen a few minutes later carrying a tray with 3 steaming mugs of hot cocoa. Gently, he held each mug to the lips of the bound teenagers so they could sip. The boys were baffled. They'd expected anger or violence, not kindness. Jason's eyes overflowed with tears as he drank. Malik whispered a choked thank you. Even Tyler, after a moment's hesitation, accepted a sip, his bravado finally broken. Setting the tray aside, Walt settled into his armchair. In the warm lamplight, he studied the 3 boys. They looked so young and scared now. For a long moment, he said nothing, letting the reality of the situation sink in. At last, in a calm, steady voice, Walt asked, "Why would you do this? Break into my home?" The teens exchanged glances. Tyler spoke first, voice barely above a whisper. "We needed money," he admitted. "My mom can't pay rent. I thought you'd be an easy target." He bit his lip, ashamed. Malik nodded, adding softly, "We figured an old man might have cash hidden away. It was a stupid plan. We see that now." Jason just hung his head. "I'm so sorry, sir," he sniffled. Walt let out a slow sigh and shook his head. "I won't lie. What you did is serious. You'll have to face the consequences." The boys looked down, dread on their faces. "But," Walt continued, "you're not hardened criminals. If you're willing to learn from this, I'll make sure you get a second chance." All 3 glanced up in surprise. Walt's voice gentled. "Everyone makes mistakes. I did too at your age. But someone gave me an opportunity to do better. I'm going to do the same for you." Tyler swallowed hard, disbelief and gratitude in his eyes. We won't waste it," he stammered. In the distance, sirens grew louder. The police were almost here. Walt rose and looked each teen in the eye. "You assumed I was weak because I'm old," he said, almost sadly. "A lot of people underestimate others by how they look. Let this be the night you stop doing that. I spent my life catching dangerous people, and I can tell you, true strength isn't about muscle or noise. It's the quiet vigilance that protects a community. Remember that." Red and blue lights flashed through the front window as a patrol car arrived. Moments later, firm knocks rattled the door. "Police! Everything all right in there?" Walt opened the door to two officers with hands on their holsters. The scene that greeted them left them stunned. Three teenagers sitting subdued on the floor, their hands zip-tied, with an older man standing calmly by, and the cozy smell of chocolate in the air. Walt raised his hands in a friendly gesture. "Officers, I'm Walt Grant. I'm the homeowner. I've got things under control here." The older officer's eyes widened in recognition at Walt's name. He lowered his flashlight. "Wait, Grant, as in Agent Trigan Grant?" he asked, recalling a storied FBI legend. Walt gave a modest nod. "Retired, but yes. It's good to see you, Tom." The police quickly took custody of Tyler, Malik, and Jason, guiding the bewildered boys to their feet. As they were led past Walt, Tyler mustered a quiet, genuine, "I'm sorry," and "Thank you." Walt placed a hand on the teen's shoulder briefly and gave a small nod of acknowledgement. Outside, a few sleepy neighbors had gathered on their porches in robes and slippers, drawn by the lights. They watched in amazement as the officers escorted the trio of would-be burglars, who looked more sheepish than dangerous, out to the squad car. One officer lingered to shake Walt's hand. "Heck of a job, sir," he said with a grin. Walt simply replied, "I did what I had to." As the patrol car doors closed, a neighbor or two began quietly clapping. Someone snapped a photo of Walt on his porch, gray-haired and unassuming, surrounded by police lights. In it, he looked less like a victim and more like a guardian. In the days that followed, news of Walt's actions spread quickly. The officer's body cam footage of Walt calmly serving hot cocoa to the teenagers went viral, earning him local fame as the Hot Chocolate Grandpa, a nickname that made Walt chuckle. The story struck a chord far and wide. A retired FBI agent turned quiet neighborhood hero, teaching young troublemakers a lesson with both firmness and kindness. By the next week, the precinct invited Walt to speak at a community safety meeting. Neighbors packed the room to hear his advice. Inspired by his actions, they organized a new neighborhood watch program on the spot. Walt hadn't planned on becoming a local hero when he moved to Braddock, but he accepted the role with humble grace. Now, each morning as he took his stroll, people who once only gave a brief nod would stop to chat and thank him. He had sought peace and anonymity, but found purpose and community instead. Thanks to Walt's appeal for leniency, Tyler, Malik, and Jason avoided jail. Being minors with clean records, they were placed into a rehabilitation and community service program rather than juvenile detention, under the watchful eye of their families and Walt. The three boys spent their weekends cleaning up parks and helping at the community center. It wasn't easy, but none of them complained. They knew how narrowly they had escaped a far worse fate. They would never forget the night an old man outwitted them and then treated them with compassion. Walt's lecture replayed in their minds often, and over time, each of them grew determined to live up to the second chance he'd given them. One crisp autumn morning not long after, Walt sat on his porch with a cup of coffee and watched Tyler deliver newspapers up the street, part of the boys' community service. Tyler waved shyly at Walt, and Walt raised his mug in a friendly salute. In that simple moment, Walt felt a swell of quiet pride. The neighborhood was a little safer now, a little closer knit, and those three young lives were back on the right path. Walter Grant had wanted a quiet retirement, and in a way, he got his wish. The nights in Braddock were peaceful, thanks in part to his own quiet vigilance. He protected his community not with brute force, but with wisdom, courage, and a good heart. And in doing so, He showed everyone that true strength lives in the spirit of watchful neighbors and the power of a second chance.